This chart shows the estimated population of Gaul prior to the year 58 BCE, sitting between 8 and 10 million people. Over the next 9 years, that number plummeted, leaving 1 million dead and another million sold into slavery. Over the next 9 years, that number plummeted, leaving 1 million dead and another million sold into slavery. The man responsible for this violence is remembered today as a brilliant military strategist and author of De Bello Gallico, a text celebrated for 2 millennia for elegant Latin prose. Returning to Rome in triumph, Caesar himself claimed his campaigns resulted in the deaths of 1,192,000 enemy combatants and civilians across his battlefields. Looking at this historical record forces us to address 2 separate problems. First, how exactly a single Roman commander reliably defeated native armies that frequently outnumbered him 2 to 1. And second, whether the systemic slaughter he orchestrated meets the legal criteria for genocide. Caesar's continued success on the battlefield relied on a radical asymmetry in logistics and organizational discipline. He built a highly legal war machine that, when directed by fierce political ambition, generated mass atrocities matching our modern legal definitions of demographic destruction. Modern popular culture often pictures the Gauls as unequipped barbarian hordes. The reality is quite different. The Gauls possessed highly advanced metallurgy. However, they lacked centralized state funding. Wealthy nobles fought in primitive steel plate, while the poorest warriors arrived with little armor at all. Rome countered this by strictly prioritizing unit cohesion. A Roman legionnaire was given standardized equipment, a uniform scudum shield, and a short gladius sword. They were trained to fight in tight, interlocking structures, where each soldier protected the man next to him, creating a wall of defense against an enemy focused heavily on individual martial prowess. A second, more critical disparity lay in logistics. Gallic tribal armies relied heavily on the summer harvest. They simply did not possess the supply chains required to feed massive, concentrated field armies across an entire year. The Romans weaponized this specific weakness. Supplied by extensive supply chains and allied contributions, Roman forces could erect complex fortified camps and siege works in a matter of hours. They did not always need to meet the Gauls in open combat. They could simply cut off their supplies and starve them into submission. Roman victory was built on systemic, structural superiority. A highly disciplined, continuously fed military machine will consistently break a fragmented, harvest-dependent enemy. Caesar exploited Gaul's political fragmentation. Instead of fighting a unified front, he formed strategic alliances and picked off rival tribes individually. In 55 BCE, 2 Germanic tribes, the Usipetes and Tencteri, crossed the Lower Rhine into Gaul. Following a minor cavalry skirmish during a period of truce, Caesar detained their diplomatic envoys and launched a surprise assault on their camp. The Roman forces bypassed the armed warriors and specifically targeted the fleeing non-combatants. Caesar dispatched his cavalry to run down the women and children attempting to escape toward the confluence of the Rhine and Meuse rivers. Caesar proudly reported an alleged death toll of 430,000. This massacre triggered severe political backlash back in the capital. The Roman senator Cato the Younger demanded that Caesar be formally extradited and handed over to the surviving Germans as atonement. While Cato was a political rival, his demand reveals an important historical baseline. Even within the highly aggressive, ruthless norms of the Roman Republic, Caesar's violation of a truce and the subsequent mass slaughter of civilians crossed an accepted boundary. Evaluating a 1st century BCE commander through a modern legal lens presents a historiographical challenge. We have to determine whether applying the term genocide to ancient warfare is historically accurate or merely anachronistic. To test this, we use the framework established by the United Nations Convention on Genocide, adopted in 1948 following the Second World War. Article 2 of that convention provides a precise definition. Genocide requires the explicit intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. A racial or religious motive is not required. The deliberate destruction of a national group is sufficient. We can cross-reference this exact criteria against Caesar's primary source text, De Bello Gallico, specifically his account of his campaign against the Eburones. Following a devastating ambush by the Eburones, Caesar sought total revenge. He organized a campaign in the dead of winter, systematically burning their villages, destroying their harvests, and driving off their herds. He wrote explicitly that his goal was to ensure the survivors starved and to eradicate their nation and their very name. Because Caesar explicitly recorded his intent to eradicate an entire national group by his own hand, his actions against the Eburones strictly fulfill the 1948 United Nations criteria for the crime of genocide. Caesar's 9-year campaign was driven by immense personal debt and his ambition to match the political prestige of rivals like Pompey and Rome. He justified this violence using the Roman ideology of defensive imperialism. To the Roman mind, preemptive expansion, the conquest of neighboring tribes, and the extermination of potential threats were necessary measures to secure a peaceful border. Viewed through this lens, De Bello Gallico operates as a carefully calibrated political defense. Caesar was writing to a highly skeptical Roman Senate, justifying an astronomical civilian death toll under the guise of Rome's perceived mission to impose civilization, spare the subjected, and fight down the arrogant. Confronting the dark side of this history does not require removing Caesar from our curriculum. Instead, it forces us to read his texts critically. This history provides us with a clear, documented case study of how superior military logistics, combined with intense personal ambition and the rhetoric of civilization, can be seamlessly weaponized to execute and justify mass demographic destruction.